I was 4 years old when I started. I was a prodigy trader. Our house growing up, art was everywhere and books were everywhere. I've been a broker on the floor for 41 years. With technology, now it happens in a millisecond.
But before you sit down...
Right, you should all see this.
Custom made this morning, I understand.
It's all about branding, marketing, and merchandise.
Got a mic next to you. All righty, let's get right into this. I'm a former hedge fund allocator in another life, and this man's face told me on a daily basis more about the direction of the market than any analyst report that I ever had to read. So Peter, it's a weird thing sitting on the stage next to you at Christie. So thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
You know and name frequently the exact day you started on the exchange.
I do. It was March 28th, 1985.
How did you know this was your calling?
You know what? I actually did not. You know, I grew up in New York City, and I was sort of an entrepreneur as a high school. I went to Riverdale Country School, and I was already sort of a bit of a hustler there. I was making actually T-shirts and selling them at Grateful Dead. Making T-shirts and selling them at Grateful Dead concerts. And then I went to college, and actually I have a degree in agriculture. That was my first degree. I'm not sure where that came from. And then I sort of pivoted into international finance, and I ended up spending 2 years in West Africa running accounting for a Norwegian oil company. So I've done lots of things sort of on the quest to find what I really love to do. And then after college, I came back to New York, and I was getting a master's at Baruch in business. I opened up a record store on Bleecker Street. And it was, we're talking 1978. It was modeled after a European record store. It had a coffee shop and an art gallery, actually, way back then. I didn't even realize that. That's where my relationship to art goes to. So it was sort of a beautiful little shop on Carmine Street. Everyone should know that neighborhood. And so you had a coffee shop, an art gallery. You could listen to the records before you bought them. So it was already sort of a concierge experience that I was involved in. And I was trading commodities. And then that sort of didn't really work out. And I was smart enough to know when, you start something and you make a go at it and it's not working, you go to the front door, you lock it and move on. And so after spending that time in Africa, I came back to New York, and I was 24, and I ended up getting a summer job on the floor of the stock exchange. And I had, a number of family members who were in finance. And they knew that atmosphere, that sort of adrenaline-filled, you've probably all seen what the movies of Wall Street looked like back in the 70s and 80s. It was a open outcry auction market, Christie's, right? It was not as sort of, I don't know what the word would be. The difference between the way our auction market works and a Christie's auction market is a little bit different.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that.
We're a bunch of adrenaline-filled screaming and yelling. Open outcry is how we describe it. But I kind of knew it was for me. Literally, the moment I walked down on the floor, there were 7,000 people there. And, I felt like I had arrived. And
you mentioned to it, so the Corona Record Gallery.
It was called Corona Record Gallery.
Right.
It was named after Norwegian money.
And rare jazz vinyl African art.
Correct.
And you also talked about nights at Studio 54.
I was actually the doorman at Studio 54. And I survived to tell the story. Yeah. Not that many people did.
So was there a collector and a curator already inside you?
I really think so. The fact that I was already collecting African art and selling it, the funny thing about my experience with my record store was that by the time I opened the doors of the store, which really it was a beautiful espresso bar and a beautiful art gallery. I had not budgeted for records. And so I did not have enough money by the time I opened the door to buy records for the store, so I put my own record collection in the stacks, and I ended up having to sell that. But, there was definitely a collector and a curator in me at that point.
And you've also traced this to your childhood. Your parents arrived 1949. With what you called a certain aesthetic.
Look, my parents are from Eastern Europe. They're Holocaust survivors. So they went through 4 years in concentration camps. They ended up falling in love after the war and moving to America and really realizing their American dream. My father became a well-known doctor, and my mother was by his side throughout the whole time. And so that Eastern European, I would say, sort of Jewish, education and art. I mean, in our house growing up, there were, art was everywhere and books were everywhere, and that whole aesthetic of, knowing as much. My mother spoke 14 languages. And so we had that clearly some special aesthetic, and obviously art was a big part of that.
And that inheritance, shapes your eye. And I think this is incredible. You eventually took over a whole corridor in the New York Stock Exchange, the big board art hall.
So, I would love to talk about that a little bit because, so the stock exchange is, the artwork in the stock exchange. There are etchings of Alexander Hamilton and there are pictures of, the 1600s, 1800s. And when I'd been a broker on the floor I've been there now for 41 years. I was 4 years old when I started. I was a prodigy trader. Anyway, when social media came along and I got on Instagram, Instagram has this amazing ability of introducing you to things that you're interested in and watching. And so they started sending me things about finance and things about art. And it turns out that there's an incredible generation of young artists, pop artists, whose art relates to money. And there's one, Mr. E is another one, King Saladin is another one. And so they all sort of started to come into my world and I met them. It turned out very many of them knew each other. And so I went to the stock exchange and I said, Twitter is listing and Snapchat and the market is becoming a little hipper, as it were. Mm-hmm. I said, would you guys give me a wall to put up some more modern art than is in the building? And I did not think they would go for it because they're a little bit conservative. And the gentleman who was head of communications fell in love with the art that I had proposed. And so not only did they give me a wall, they gave me the corridor so the sixth floor of the stock exchange is where the boardroom is. The boardroom is an incredible room modeled after Versailles. The ceiling was commissioned in 1860 by Tiffany. Before Tiffany made diamonds, they made stained glass, and there's this incredible room. The ceiling is all, the walls are made of gold. And so everybody, every CEO, every head of state, prime minister, everybody who's launching a new company has to walk from the elevator to the boardroom when they're ringing the opening or closing bell. So they were nice enough to give me that walk from there, and that's where I put my gallery. So we were recently voted one of the most notable private galleries in the world. I've done 3 curations since then, and so everybody who gets to ring the opening bell, which is a very exclusive group, gets to walk through my gallery, and that's been one of the most extraordinary things.
And it's interesting because in a way, you embody that there is more of an overlap between Wall Street and 20 Rock than I think we want to believe or are led to believe. And you call the exchange the last human market.
Correct.
And the art world runs on, I think, a similar irrational conviction. What do you believe they both get right about valuing what can't be measured?
It's amazing. So stock markets around the world historically did have human beings involved. Obviously, technology came along probably late 80s into the early 2000s. We resisted the technology coming in and taking over the trading world on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. Everyone should know that, which is where a lot of the tech stocks are traded, is, you may see it on TV when they ring the bell, but that's, and they see confetti and you see people there. There are no humans there. It is literally an electronic marketplace. So the NYSE, the New York Stock Exchange, is the last human marketplace in the world. There may be 3 brokers somewhere in Amsterdam trading a few shares of stock, but that's been one thing that we have maintained on the floor of the stock exchange. At one point, in 1903, they issued 1,366 seats on the stock exchange, which gives you the right to trade. And they've kept that. And so that place where, humans were, interacting and actually, negotiating, finding value in these publicly traded companies, something that no machine or no AI, sorry, I wasn't going to say AI, could do. And so we've been able to, in this world where our whole lives have been sort of not taken over, but infiltrated, I would say, by technology. And virtually every business has been infiltrated by it. The stock exchange and the people there have realized that that human element is so important, more important now than ever before. Everyone says, oh, you guys are like a bunch of, you're an old museum, we don't need you anymore, the stock market doesn't need humans involved. But in a world and a market where there's volatility and madness, we have days now, courtesy of the new administration, where there's volatility at levels that we've never seen before. Things happen in one day today that used to take a generation to happen. We can literally, by definition, go from a bear market to a bull market over a coffee break, right? And that's trillions of dollars of value being lost and added to the market in any given day. And so if you think about it, you get on a plane and you're going across to Europe and everything's cool and the weather is fine. You wouldn't be that concerned if you went to the cockpit and it was just on autopilot. Yeah. But if you're out there and you hit a storm over the ocean, you surely want to know that there's somebody flying that plane, right? I'm not somebody who's going to, get on a plane where there's no pilot, get in a car where there's no driver, and let nobody or a robot take control of my money, right? And put a value on things that are important to me. And so we've been able to, in this world where so much technology is taken and infiltrated our lives, we still have that human element. I happen to be lucky enough to be the ambassador and sort of the face of the stock exchange. And, obviously my emotional, quite you, everybody seems to know that I'm the face when there's a great market or there's a bad market. So I'm, it's an equal opportunity face, emotion. But the human element in this world, even though people think it's not necessary, is more necessary and relevant, I think, than ever before.
In the world that I lived in, and really lived, I was telling somebody at the dinner last night that I won't say where I worked, but I owned for 3 years in a row the largest seamless web tab and the largest black car tab. And my team was small. And you said something in a past interview, and it landed with me, I think because I lived this and was forced to live this. I spent over a decade in investment management, and more than half of that was rebuilding the private funds product desk, again, for this very prestigious investment bank that bought a once very prestigious investment bank. And
will remain nameless.
Yeah, they'll remain nameless. And over that period of time, I had a very small team, and we regrew this business line from literally $0 to multiple billions, just prior to me coming over to Christie's. And again, I'm emphasizing how small my team was. I was trying to do the math. We're talking maybe 12 people total that built this. And it was the camaraderie. It was that human connectivity that really allowed for that success to be possible. And you were alluding to it, but I'm just going to give the number. And for some of you who just may not be familiar with this, 70 to 90% of the daily market volume is now algorithmic. Right? And so what you said was that nothing productive about it. So what do you, working on the exchange floor, still see and feel that a machine doesn't?
So, well, good question. It's kind of complicated. Look, obviously, order flow is one thing that I can see. The market, it's fascinating that how having technology, as I say once again, infiltrate, our business, and as it's done every business, it's incredible to note how. So think about it. If I go back to 1985, the way orders were disseminated, right? People would be sitting up on a desk at Goldman Sachs or any other company, and they would decide they've got a couple of $1 billion under management. Today, they decide they're going to buy XYZ and sell, ABC. And then they would call those orders down to the floor, and there would be a human being there at a tree of telephones. We used to have 100 phones, if you remember, when you used to press those little buttons where the light would go on. And we'd pick up the phone, take an order, beep a broker would come in, you'd give him the order, he would run out to the crowd, there would be a whole crowd, a market maker and other brokers, and everybody would sort of say what their interest was, and we started this open outcry negotiation. And then we would trade, right? And then the orders would go, I would raise my hand, scream squad, a person would come running up in a little blue coat who made $47 a week. They'd grab the paper, take it to the booth. It was reported. And And then the process began, which was, you would think this, with technology now it happens in a millisecond, but back then that order would be input into a computer, it would go upstairs, we would wrap it in a little plastic thing, it would be shot up in a pneumonic tube to a floor where there were these women who would input it and create the ticker tape, right? And then a few days later the money would be matched up, right? And and then in the crowd there was a person called a reporter who would be putting on the trade. They would have to notate, if that's a word, who bought, who sold, how many shares, the price, the time, so that it was basically the beginning of blockchain. They would have to put a ledger to every trade that happened, right? Now this is all done within a millisecond, right? But it's still, that process still is exactly the way it was done back then. It's just happening, in a queue, right? If I enter an order now electronically, the order still has to go behind everybody who got ahead of me on this amazing information highway. And so, even though it's being done electronically, the human element is still very powerful within that mode. I mean, right now, when I get to the stock exchange, I'm able to identify the order flow, the dollar notional value of stocks coming in for the opening bell, the closing bell, which are our biggest auctions, right? If anyone is watching their portfolio, please never look at your portfolio when the market's down 1,000 points at the end of the day, because there's nothing you can do about it. But still, those are our biggest auctions, right? Which is amazing, to be in Christie's, right? For me, that's incredibly exciting because my world is all about auctions. So on the opening bell, millions of shares trade. On the closing bell, that's our largest auction. Mm-hmm. But everything that goes into that moment, it starts with a bell, ends with a bell. All the technology and then the human input is incredible that goes into that auction, right? I mean, I can just sort of think of, when you see what goes on here, when there's an actual auction of the person up front and the people in the crowd with their number and all that. What I can see there, even though there are very few people, there are probably about 700-800 people, everybody has sort of a different way of interpreting what happens on the floor right now. There's so much that I see as a human being that's really important. I mean, my customers still want to use me because I offer them an edge. Mm-hmm. And that edge is how I interpret what I see, right? Within this electronic and techno world of, orders going by in milliseconds, the way my brain works, I can actually see it and identify it.
Yeah, it's that context, and you alluded to this as well. Again, your expressions, they have been called the aspirations and disappointments of investors the world over. But you've also experienced a number of key moments. There, panic in both directions, right? So Black Monday in '87, the dot-com burst, 2008, which I guess created my career, to be honest with you. COVID. We're obviously sitting now on another panic trade, a FOMO trade.
Yeah, we are.
And there's something interesting. You actually said this. You apparently read my notes, even though you said you didn't want to know my questions. That these recoveries, they're quicker than the one prior.
I'm glad you asked me that because it is so important. That is information. So one of the things I do, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm a trader, and I call myself a forensic broker. I try and explain to the world. I have a huge social media following who, for some crazy reason, loves to listen and watch everything I say about the market. I've actually traded more crashes than any human being alive today. My dear friend Julia was on the floor for many years, and we would do interviews at the end of the day to try and understand from a forensic point of view why the market did what it did. But literally every one of these sell-offs, pullbacks, consolidations, and crashes, and there have been just a handful of them, have actually been a better buying opportunity than a selling opportunity. If you want to get specific, if one goes back to the financial crisis of 2008, right? And each one of the crashes that we've had has had different components that made it happen, right? If you go back to the crash of 2008, each one of these crashes and pullbacks that we've had has had different components that made them up, right? We know that 2009 was a predatory lending crash, right? We knew that those guys up at one firm we won't discuss created these, or decided they were going to lend credit and sell houses to people who could not afford either of them. And then they created this big bubble, and we ended up in a massive financial crisis. When we had to, and when the gavel fell on the New York Stock Exchange and our economy, the Federal Reserve decided they would put $800 billion into the market as a stimulus to backstop what would have been an incredibly devastating, it was devastating as it was, but it would have been a lot worse, to backstop the economy at that time. They put $800 billion into the market over 18 months. It took 9 years for the market to get back to even. During COVID, when we obviously a health crisis, way bigger in a lot of ways, they realized that the work they had done in the last one would not be sufficient in this one to bail out our economy. And they put $3 trillion into the market over 3 months. And we were back to even by August 12th of 2020. If you'll remember, COVID was May 23rd, 2020. Okay, we were back to even in the market after selling off 10,800 points in the Dow Jones Industrial Average. We were back to even by August 12th.
Well, the humans chase the algos and all of those. I mean, as we wrap up here, you started off as a collector, we'll call
Yes.
it. You today champion young street artists. You encourage students to chase their dreams. 40 years on the exchange. You will eventually walk off that floor for the last time.
No.
What do you hope?
They'll carry me.
What? All right, they'll drag you off the floor of the exchange.
Kicking and screaming.
One last time. What do you hope the market remembers about the human side, that the data?
About how integral human beings look. This thing that we have here, while everybody seems to think it's a way of connecting us, we can stand at a party and sort of hide in the back and be anybody we want, and nobody really knows who we are, and we can really isolate ourselves. And as much as social media has sort of come out as this way of connecting us, it really isn't. If you look at, I do a lot of work with high school and college students, and you'd be amazed at how they have no idea how to interact with another human being. Right? They only know how to do it with this, and that's not their real self, and so I really try, and I think the most important thing is the human connection. Is that is the legacy that needs to be happening from now on, is the fact that we need to connect to each other. So much can happen. Everybody thinks, you need to do some really big thing to change the world, but literally one person to another, that connection that can start something. Start the ball rolling, that's so powerful. And it's really important that we use all the technology that we have and all this social media to connect each other in every possible way, as opposed to it being, something that's very exclusive and not inclusive. And, the human interaction from one human being to another is clearly the most important thing. That will be it. If we don't do that, we'll probably blow ourselves up. But it is, and no one will even know what happened. What happened to the person next door. We need when the work I've done, when I've been able to put people together around, whether it's the stock market, around whether it's art. It's extraordinary, that feeling that you get, when I'm a team player. I love, I don't need to be standing on some mountaintop with a whole bunch of cash by myself. I want everybody to sort of, experience the success and the feeling you get when people are together and talking to each other and communicating. So
Well said.
That's what I'm hoping for.
Well, thank you so much for being the face of the market for 40 years. Thank you, Peter.